This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Tēnā koutou, hello and welcome to Heritage Matters, a program brought to you by the Southern Heritage Trust and sponsored by Heritage New Zealand. I'm Judy Southworth. In this program, Gregor Campbell tells us about the Dunedin area known as the Devil's Half-acre and some of the shocking living conditions there. Bill Southworth profiles war artist Peter McIntyre, and Alison Breese discovers the story about a Lawrence burial tomb. The Devil's Half-acre was an area near Dunedin's Stafford Street in the 19th century, best known for its crime, brothels and grog shops. But it was also home to some of the city's poorest people to whom life was a constant struggle. This report from Gregor Campbell.
Dunedin's Devil's Half-acre was, unsurprisingly, a half-acre section where things occurred which were often the subject of police and newspaper attention. Eventually, the name became used for a larger area of poverty, disorder and crime. It was a place of life and death and stories, including the following which was published as a memory in 1875. The names were originally published as initials only, and I've added names to aid the flow of the story. Tom Grab's Yarn. My name is Thomas Garrick, and as my initials thus take the form of TG, some of my facetious friends have nicknamed me Tom Grab, by which name I'm pretty well known in Dunedin. My occupation is that of a bailiff. One of the most painful cases that I've had to take in hand occurred in the year 1867. I remember it was a very cold day in April, with a nasty drizzling rain and a dull grey sky giving promise of a snowstorm. I, with a few other men on the lookout for a job of any sort, was standing under the veranda of the old post office at the corner of Jetty Street, when a tall, ill-looking man, who had on a large white oilskin coat, came up and asked me if I was not a bailiff. Visions of earning a few bobs crossed my imagination, and I hastily replied, "Yes, I am a bailiff or anything else." The tall individual then told me to follow him, which I did, to a little office in Princess Street, not far from the Rattray Street corner. He then gave me the necessary papers and instructions to seize for rent. The house which I was about to enter was situated in a right-of-way off Walker Street, near that portion now known as the Devil's Half-acre. It contained 3 rooms and was let at a rental of 37 shillings a week. The same house is now let for 8 shillings. After I was shown the house, I had some difficulty in getting into it, for the tenant, knowing that a bailiff was to be put in, had nailed the windows down and kept the doors constantly locked. However, as I thought they could not possibly know me, I went boldly up to the door and knocked. A woman's voice from within asked me what I wanted. I inquired if she could tell me where Mr. Loudon lived, a fictitious name, of course. She made some sort of reply about not knowing, but I pretended not to hear her and asked why she did not open the door. As soon as I mentioned the word door, I heard a voice, Mr. Stevens, call out, "Emily, keep that door locked," and I got no further replies, so walked away with the painful impression on my mind that someone knew too much for me, Mr. Stevens especially. After having informed my employer of my unsuccessful attempt to get into the house, he was very wroth with me, called me a fool, and paid me sundry other compliments. He also informed me that if I did not get in the next day, he would employ someone else. The next day I recommenced operations, went behind the house, tried the back door very quietly, locked, tried to raise the window, nailed down. I now began to entertain serious thoughts of letting myself down the chimney, but as I'm a rather portly individual, I thought I would probably stick in the chimney, so the idea was abandoned. Many brilliant ideas are abandoned when found impractical. While I was considering what to do, I saw a man coming up the right-of-way with a basket on his head and crying, "Watercress!" In fact, it was Watercress Jack, a well-known character in those days, who used to clean boots at the provincial corner in the morning and sell cress in the evening, and according to report made a few £100s at it. It immediately occurred to me that if I could get Jack to knock at the door of my house, there would be no suspicion attached to him, and it would probably be opened, and then there would be a chance for me to dash in. So I beckoned to Jack, and when he came up to me, remarked in an offhand sort of manner, as though I were connected with the family, "I believe they want some cresses, Jack." "Oh, thank you, sir," says Jack. And he knocked at the door, at the same time bawling out lustily, "Fine watercresses." Capital, thought I, and edged up behind Jack so that I might be close when the door opened. There was then some whispering inside, and then the blind was pulled up so that it might be seen who was at the door. I then slunk behind Jack. Now the key was turned, the door partly opened, and a hand thrust out a small plate. I now thought that time was up, and gave a spring with my whole force against the door, smashing the plate and rolling Jack over his basket at the same time. I discovered that there was a strong arm behind the door and a set of very hard knuckles, for I had no sooner got my head inside than I received a crack on my nasal organ, which made me see a beautiful collection of stars flying about in all directions. However, after a short but tough struggle, I gained my footing inside. "It's all up," said I, producing my documents. "Yes, you wretch, it is all up," was the reply. "You have done me at last." After I'd been in the house a few minutes, Mr. Stevens cooled down considerably and smilingly said, "Well, I suppose anything is fair with a bailiff." He then offered to assist me in taking an inventory, and such an inventory it was. The following specimen will give an idea of the whole. Child's perambulator, one wheel off. Plated teapot, handle broken. 3 odd chimney ornaments, 1 large chest used as a table, 1 chair, 1 sailor's cutlass, Shakespeare's works, 3 odd volumes of Chambers' Encyclopedia, 2 cups, 3 saucers, 1 Bible, leaves out, 1 copy Chronicles of Gotham. These were the most valuable articles in the house. Mr. Stevens took me into the bedroom, in one corner of which, on the floor, was a straw mattress covered with some old coats and bags. Mrs. Stevens was in the room, kneeling over a cradle made out of a gin case. She looked up at us as we entered the room, and her poor, thin, white face bore all the appearances of starvation. She had very large black eyes which, when she looked at me, seemed to go right through me and made me feel as though I were a criminal in being there. The child over which she was leaning was as white as its poor mother. In fact, it was dying, dying for want of proper nourishment. After I'd finished the inventory, I began to feel rather hungry and inquired if they had anything to eat in the house, and was shown some stale bread, a saucer half full of dripping, and some salt. "This is the dainty food," said Mr. Stevens, "upon which we have been living for the last 3 weeks." I then gave him £0.50, and he sent one of his children for some butter, cheese, and a fresh loaf. While we were eating the bread and cheese, Mrs. Stevens, who would not leave her child for a moment, gave a loud shriek. I and her husband ran into her and found her lying on the floor insensible. After giving her some water and bringing her to her senses, she exclaimed, "Oh, Edwin, our child!" and burst out sobbing. She had been kissing the infant, and while doing so discovered that it was dead. Its pure little spirit had passed silently away to that better place, even while the affectionate mother was watching. I was to sell the furniture next day, what there was, at 1 o'clock. And at about a quarter of an hour before that time, a rough, fat little man entered the house, looked around, and seeing Mrs. Stevens, rushed up and kissed her, and turning to Mr. Stevens, exclaimed, "Hello, Ned! Why, don't you know me?" It was Mrs. Stevens' brother. Upon matters being explained to him, 2 large tears could be seen in the corner of his eyes, and wiping them away, he said, "Blessed if I ain't always too late now. If I'd come a day sooner, that there baby wouldn't have died." And then turning to me with the remark, "What's to pay, mate?" pulled out a leather bag from his pocket and offered to pay all dues at once. I at once went for the landlord who, when I brought him, commenced a long story to the effect that he was greatly pushed for money himself, or he wouldn't have been so severe with his tenant, etc. But he was cut short by Mrs. Stephen's brother, who, by the way, was a lucky digger, exclaiming, "Oh, I don't want none of your yarns. Tell me what's owing to you." He then settled the account, gave me a sovereign, and cleared me and the landlord out of the house. Mr. Stephens is now a prosperous tradesman not 100 miles from the principal street in Dunedin. The landlord was, a few months ago, undergoing a sentence of 2 years imprisonment for embezzlement, and from the little I saw of him, I fully believe it serves him right. Them's my sentiments. And I'm the often sentimental Gregor Campbell for Heritage Matters.
While New Zealand soldiers were battling their way through Crete, North Africa and Italy in the Second World War, Dunedin-born Peter McIntyre was with them as the official war artist, visually recording their victories and defeats through his paintings and sketches. His work became extremely popular both to our soldiers and to those waiting anxiously at home. This report from Bill Southworth.
Peter McIntyre was born in Dunedin in 1910, the son of a founder of the Caxton Printing Company. His father also worked for the Otago Daily Times as a graphic artist and exhibited work at the Otago Art Society. His father, artist, stimulated his interest in painting, and while he was at Otago Boys High School, young Peter received art lessons and earned pocket money illustrating fashions offered in clothing stores. In his autobiography, The Painted Years, he recalled his first contact with the military.
I came running down the street past all the familiar and accepted things at a time when nothing seemed to change, and there, coming up the long, tiry road, was a troop of soldiers on horseback, the very heralds of war and upheaval. I can still see the wide Australian-style hats turned up at one side, and the leather bandoliers across the chests. They must have been a troop of Otago mounted rifles training to go overseas. It was 1914, and I was 4 years old.
Later that year, he went to Port Chalmers with his mother to see a troop ship depart. A band was playing on a green rotunda at the harbour end of George Street. On the ship's decks was a solid mass of karki, swarming up the ladders of the mast, the topmost figures holding on with one hand and waving in heroic silhouette.
Years later, when so many of the men on that troop ship were dead on Gallipoli or the Somme, my mother used to recall that, as the ship drew away down Otago Harbour, an old man in the crowd said, "Not many of that lot will come back." And the people beside him had scoffed and said what nonsense he was talking.
At the end of World War II, Peter McIntyre returned to Port Chalmers. The green band rotunda was still there, but it looked tawdry and forlorn, as he commented that it was, quote, "the measure of my disillusionment across the years." In 1930 he had gone to Otago University to do a BA in journalism, and while he was there he drew cartoons for the Capping magazine. However, he abandoned journalism and instead enrolled for 3 years at the Slade School of Fine Art in London. There, the boy from Dunedin was dumbstruck by the beautiful nude models, as well as the famous painters who had preceded him at the school. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, with prizes in composition and figure drawing. From 1935 on, he worked as a freelance commercial artist in Britain, but he also exhibited work that was influenced by European modernism and French cubism. This placed him in the company of expatriate New Zealanders, Francis Hodgkins and Len Lai. He described this period as his bohemian period and enjoyed the lifestyle and round of parties and drinking that went with it. He also visited Germany.
The new man, Hitler, had become Chancellor, and squads of brown shirts would go marching past in the streets to be saluted by outstretched palm by some, and to be pointedly ignored by most of the citizens. At all hours of the night you could hear those brown shirts stamping past, singing German marching songs. We thought little of it at the time, and only looking back we saw the tenseness of the atmosphere.
When the war broke out, McIntyre tried to join the British Army, but at that stage they were not sufficiently geared up to take more recruits. So, after hearing a unit of New Zealanders was being formed, he tried his luck at New Zealand House in London. He was one of 150 Kiwis who were sent to train at Aldershot Camp.
I realised that after 9 years I was back with my fellow New Zealanders. Opposite me sat a man with a blue-belted raincoat and a scarf. As I watched him, he twisted his head sideways and downward, in the gesture of a man with water in his ear, and winked. "G'day, how's she going?" he said. And my 9 years of exile melted away.
The recruited New Zealanders were sent to Māori camp in Egypt, where he was able to take up his art again. He discovered that his interest in painting did not lie with the avant-garde, but with romantic realism. He illustrated magazines and did advertisements.
I was put to designing the Christmas card. Bending over my desk one day, I was startled when General Freiberg put his head round the corner in his amiable way and said, "What are you doing?" Some watercolours I had done in the desert and various drawings of soldiers were propped around the head of my desk, and he pounced on them. I found he knew all about me and my work, which was typical of the man.
In 1940 he was appointed New Zealand's official war artist and was promoted to the rank of lieutenant by Major General Bernard Freiberg. In what he described as the 5 most interesting years of his life, he sketched soldiers of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force as they fought in Crete and then in North Africa against the German General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, and finally at the Battle of Cassino in Italy. His images of German paratroopers landing in Crete, where official army photographers were banned, became the only visual record of the battle. 672 New Zealanders were killed there, and 2,180 captured. McIntyre himself only escaped the island by the skin of his teeth. When his work was displayed back in Egypt, General Freiberg promoted him to captain. He also painted the Maori Battalion in action in Italy and the wounded at Cassino, after which he was promoted to major. The sketches and paintings made him a household name back in New Zealand. At the end of the war, General Freiberg collected all those left who had been in the battle at Crete and took them back to Crete on the HMS Ajax. The Cretans gave them a tremendous welcome, and in every village they passed through they put carpets strewn with flowers. It was a harrowing to discover that the Germans had shot people for hiding New Zealand soldiers left behind or on the run. In one village they'd shot all the males from 12 years up.
General Freiberg gave a reception on the quarterdeck of the Ajax in Suda Bay for Cretan men who had helped the Kiwis. The toughest bunch of brigands you'd ever seen, dressed in baggy pants with large knives at their waist. There was some Māori among us, and inspired by the occasion they stripped to the waist and performed a rousing haka. This was too much for the Cretans. They leapt into the fray, brandishing their long knives and leaping into the air with blood-curdling cries.
When McIntyre returned to Dunedin at the end of the war, he met his wife Patricia and tried to earn a living as a painter from a studio in Princes Street. He was arguably the country's only full-time painter, and he found there was a lack of professionalism in the galleries and limited critical knowledge among painters and writers. His first exhibition in Dunedin was a failure, and few bothered to come and see it. Next, he tried to gather artists around him who would develop a national school. This didn't work out either. He married at First Church and then spent an extended honeymoon for 3 months at Doctor's Point near Waitati. He was almost despairing of earning a living as an artist until he moved to Wellington, where his next exhibition was a roaring success. McIntyre moved to Wellington and things continued to improve, but he was still critical of the local art scene.
The great interest in art that has swept the world has made itself felt here to some extent. Man is no longer content with his mass-produced chromium gadget. He is demanding something individual that he can call his own. And so at last there is a place in the community for a few painters like myself, a reward for the years of uncertainty. Not that New Zealand is yet a bed of roses for the artist. The country is too set in prejudices, too provincial for that.
Eventually, McIntyre's work became enormously popular with the public and fetched high prices. He also wrote a series of books, reproducing his art. One sold out in 6 days and remained a bestseller for 20 years. Another book on a series of paintings in the United States was just called The West, and there it sold 27,000 copies. His paintings of Venice reached record sales of $110,000. His health declined in later life, and he died in 1995. He spent much of his final years at a holiday home in Ofango, a small village between National Park and Taramanui. I happened to visit him there once. The house was perched high above the Whakapapa River, with beautiful views down into that remarkable river. He had, of course, painted the views from his house. He had tried unsuccessfully to save the Whakapapa from a hydro scheme, and had made the national news with his comment, "The Philistine has arrived with his bulldozers." In preparing this item, I'm grateful to Peter McIntyre for 2 of his many books, The Painted Years and Peter McIntyre, War Artist. This is Bill Southworth reporting.
In the historic graveyard at Lawrence stands an elaborate and impressive tomb. It contains the bodies of a Chinese hotel owner and his wife. When Alison Breese from Heritage New Zealand researched the tomb's story, she found it was about a 19th century Chinese man who was able to successfully integrate himself into European society.
Heritage New Zealand's Poheri Taonga Rārangi Kōrero list is constantly evolving and being updated with new listings. And one of the latest nominations being worked on is for Sam Tulane's tomb in Lawrence. The amazing number of digital archives available nowadays have helped uncover mysteries in this week's potential new listing. Stretching from the goldfields of the 1850s Victoria to 1860s Lawrence and then to Christchurch, this month's research has uncovered more information about people who made up this eclectic and migrant community that was the 1860s goldfields. Sam Tulane shares the tomb with his European wife. Who were these people and why do they have such an elaborate tomb? The tomb is located within the Lawrence Cemetery in Otago. Erected for Chong Zhao Lin, or known as Sam Tulane in New Zealand, in 1903, the tomb has outstanding historic, aesthetic, architectural, cultural and social value and is a special symbol of the integration of the Chinese and European communities living in Otago at the time. The discovery of gold in central Otago at Gabriel's Gully near Lawrence in 1861 saw miners pouring into Otago. Around Otago, Chinese miners opened shops within townships to serve both Chinese and Europeans, but they mainly gathered in Chinese camps on the outskirts of town. The heart of the Chinese settlement at Half-acre was the Lawrence Chinese camp, formed around 1869. And it was here Sam Tulane was a prominent resident, contrary to the lone Chinese gold miner stereotype, who gained respect from European colonials as well as his countrymen as being an astute businessman. Standing at 6'6", or 198 centimetres tall, Tulane was one of the camp's best-known inhabitants. He became hotelier of the Chinese Empire Hotel within the Chinese camp, could speak English, joined the Presbyterian Church, and was admitted to the Masonic Lodge St George. Naturalised in 1872, he married Scottish woman Amelia Peacock in a celebration at the Chinese Empire Hotel attended by members of the Chinese community. His success and acceptance into a European society was in contrast to the wider government's stance on prejudice towards the Chinese and the various restrictive laws implemented on Chinese immigration from 1881. Tulane's funeral drew people from all over the colony. His obituary on the 18th of March 1903 praised his reputation for thorough honesty and scrupulous exactness in business matters, proved in every respect a thoroughly successful businessman. Historian James Ning noted that he was one of only 4 Otago Chinese who were accorded newspaper obituaries up to the turn of the century. His respectability in European eyes was perhaps due to the perception that he was adopting British ways and the degree to which he was assimilated into European society on the goldfields. Sam Tulane's tomb was designed in a European style and is one of the most elaborate New Zealand Chinese graves of its era. The tomb was designed by prominent architect John Arthur Burnside in Gothic style. Who was Amelia Tulane and how did she meet Sam? 7-year-old Amelia Peacock arrived in Port Adelaide, Australia on the ship Medina in 1852 with her father John, stepmother Christiana and sisters Margaret, aged 11, and Jane, aged 2. They were part of a contingent of immigrants sent out by the Land and Immigration Commissioners. Sam immigrated to Victoria from China in 1855 with the first wave of Chinese gold miners. The Peacock family and Tulane met there possibly through their mutual friend Chim Thorn Look, or John Arloo as he was known in Australia. Margaret Peacock married John in 1856 at the young age of 15 or 16. Tulane first met John Alou on the Victorian goldfields as he owned and operated Australia's first Chinese restaurant in Ballarat and was the first Chinese interpreter in the Victorian goldfields. Alou was the first Chinese detective with the Victorian Police Force, and he was later employed by the Otago Provincial Council in New Zealand as a special constable. Amelia's father, John Peacock, was a coal miner. He was frequently in trouble with the law, although the goldfields was a very rough and ready place. In 1859, he was charged with assault against none other than his own son-in-law, John Alou. He avoided jail for that offence, but was charged with being a disorderly vagrant in 1862 and was admitted to jail in 1865 and in 1869 for owing money and assault. No further mention of him is found within newspapers until his death in 1892. Amelia likely arrived in New Zealand with her sister Margaret, who in 1866 joined her husband John, who had been appointed interpreter to the Otago goldfields. Amelia worked as a barmaid in the Chinese Empire Hotel and married Sam Tulane in 1872. After Sam died in 1903, Amelia moved to Christchurch with her niece Minnie Alou, and in 1905 was admitted to Sunnyside Mental Hospital. The hospital records and her niece's recollections reveal that Aunt had an epileptic fit about 8 years ago, before which she used to drink to excess, being the wife of a publican. She was at that time completely paralysed, after which her conduct became desperate. Is quiet during daytime latterly, but frequently rowdy and turbulent at night, knocking the furniture of her room about. None of this information was well known or reported in the newspapers, perhaps as a sign of the respect that her husband had been held in. She died in 1913 of disease of the heart at the mental hospital, aged 69 years. The juxtaposition of the grandness of Tulane's tomb against the modest cluster of small headstones provides an insight into the culture of the 19th century goldfields. Most Chinese miners buried in Otago were in unmarked graves, and burial was preferred over cremation. Few were buried amongst European plots, and those that were Christians like Tulane. The tomb had over the years started to deteriorate. In recent decades, the slate roof had collapsed, the four corner columns sagged outwards, the tomb gate was missing, and the windows broken. A renovation project began in 2021, led by Adrian Shaw and undertaken by Origin Consultants. Origin took clues from the remaining parts of the tomb, including tiny shards of glass left in the putty around the windows, which enabled them to deduce that original green, amber and blue colours of the original lead lights. The restoration project included new roof framing, a slate roof, a new door, rainwater systems, rebuilding and restoring the pinnacles, strengthening the concrete walls, maintaining the steel window frames and reglazing the windows. It was unveiled in October 2021 as part of the Lawrence Descendants of the Chinese Camp reunion, and it looks amazing. The tomb is a tangible heritage structure that tells a lot of stories around early immigration of Chinese and the history of the Otago area. This story was brought to you by Alison Breese, reporting for Heritage Matters.
The award-winning Heritage Matters is broadcast on the first Monday of each month at 9:30am and replayed on the following Sunday at 7pm. There are further replays on the third week of the month, Thursday at 1pm and Sunday at 7pm. Or you can listen as a podcast from the Otago Access Radio website at oar.org.nz.
As Aotearoa New Zealand's national heritage agency, Heritage New Zealand Pohere Taonga is proud to sponsor Heritage Matters. Celebrate our heritage by becoming a member to visit more than 20 heritage places we care for across the motu for free. You'll receive a subscription to our award-winning magazine, exclusive member events, and free or discounted admission to over 1,000 international heritage places. Support the heritage of Aotearoa New Zealand. Check out visitheritage.co.nz.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.